And hello to you, and welcome to the Richard Nicholls podcast, the personal development podcast series that's here to help inspire, educate, and motivate you to be the best you can be. I'm psychotherapist Richard Nicholls, and this is episode 185. It's titled, Talking to Yourself. And if you're ready, we'll start the show. Oh, how cheesy am I? Hello there! How's it hanging? Feels weird doing so many episodes these last few weeks, but the feedback has been very, very good. I was a little bit worried. Well, as worried as I get, because I know a lot of you like what I do because it's monthly. And if you wanted more regular stuff, you'd have become a patron by now and got weekly ones. Bringing out content too often might feel a bit overwhelming for people. But I guess these weekly ones throughout June, because they're taken from the live episode that I did, they're a bit different. So that's maybe why I've had so much positive feedback about them. But it's not going to be a regular thing, not just because there's really not enough hours in the day and days in the week to make as many as I'd like. But like I say, if you wanted weekly content from me, you'd be supporting me through Patreon for £5 a month or whatever. So today's episode follows on immediately from last week's, where I was talking about mental narratives. If you missed it and you don't want to have to go back and listen to yet another one, just so that you can listen to this one, then I'll tell you what I covered. Basically, it was about the importance of keeping the voice in your head under control, but in a realistic way. I know I've spoken about it on here before, and I quote about some of the research in my book, I think, actually. But affirmations, mantras, they only really help you if you believe them. So they need to be realistic. Otherwise, you're just lying to yourself, and then you feel hopeless, and that's not the point. Your inner dialogue needs to be hopeful. If you don't believe that you are a happy and successful person, then don't lie to yourself with some affirmations that you are. Your affirmation needs to be about the steps towards being happy and successful, whatever they might be. So, along with a lot of other stuff, that was the general gist of last week's extract, and this week's extract is all about what we do with our real voice, as clients often talk to me about thinking that they're crazy if they talk out loud to themselves, not realising that actually everybody does. So that's what this section is all about, and if you're ready, I'll leave you to it. Some people find it odd, though, creating new narratives, talking to themselves, but it's actually really useful. And if you can, get the narrative right, that is. I get clients sometimes who think that there's something wrong with them because they talk to themselves, because they don't realise that everybody does. And I want to talk about that here, because I want you to get used to the idea that it's quite normal to talk to yourself. You know, if you walk about the house talking to yourself, you're not ill. It's not a sign of something seriously wrong with you, like psychosis or schizophrenia. Not on its own, anyway. I mean, yes, somebody with a distorted reality would hallucinate walking the streets talking to themselves. And if this is you, and that's a big if, then yeah, you do need psychiatric help. Speak to your GP. But just talking to yourself, that's not an indicator of anything problematic. Everybody does it in one way or another. It's just that some people do it in their thoughts and some people do it out loud for anyone that's around them to listen. Think of it this way. If you're walking around the supermarket with your partner or whoever and you're trying to remember everything that you'd previously said you were going to buy, you'd talk to them about it. You'd go through the list, even if they weren't even involved in the first place, because this happens to me a lot. You don't have a clue what they're on about, but it's still helpful for them to talk it out loud because it jogs the memory. It's just that when you're on your own in the middle of Asda, it feels a bit odd to say, what did I come in here for? But you'd do it if you were on your own at home and you just walked into the kitchen, wouldn't you? Psychologists call it private speech. And as adults, we tend to reserve private speech for shouting at the printer or just doing mental arithmetic. But under the age of 7, and kids don't think anything of it at all. They talk to themselves all the time. And they don't judge themselves because they haven't properly learned how to internalise their own thoughts yet, you see. We go through these stages of developing private speech. It starts totally out loud as soon as we're able to make any noises at all. And every year that goes on through our life, those spoken words get less and less and less until we've got the ability to do it all in our head. But whether they're mumbling to themselves at age 7 or they're thinking out loud, it helps the brain to develop. It's good for children. It makes them smarter. But just because you're able to tie your own shoelaces nowadays without having to talk yourself through it, it doesn't mean you have to stop talking to yourself, especially about new things that you're learning or times when you find that you're struggling with something. And I mention this today because in one study into private speech in adults at the University of Waterloo, I think, they got people to do some computer tasks. 2 difficult ones and an easy one. And they had to then try and recreate this origami model. They had 3 attempts to do it, and they were monitored to see how often they spoke to themselves. Guess how many of the 53 participants spoke out loud whilst doing these tasks? Yeah, all of them. At some point, all of them talked themselves through something. But there was a correlation with how much they spoke and how tricky the task was. And with the origami task, the further through the attempts they got, the easier they found it, and so the less they talked. So talking to ourselves isn't unusual, and it isn't necessarily a sign of a problem at any age. Research even shows that there's a correlation between higher exam scores and speaking out loud. It helps us to understand what's going on, I guess. Helps us to clarify what we need to do. We'd do it if we were sitting talking to somebody else, so sometimes we need to talk ourselves through it. At any age, we know that talking ourselves through something improves our performance. So, how does this help us in the real world? Why am I even telling you about this today? So, there was a research paper called Self-Directed Speech Affects Visual Search Performance. That was it. And what they asked participants to do was to find an item in a collage of lots of pictures. And some had to repeat specific words whilst they were looking in this collage. Sometimes the word they had to say had nothing to do with the picture they were looking for. So they were looking for a zebra, but they had to say the word banana as they looked. And sometimes the words were closer related. So if they were looking for a zebra in the collage, they might say something like stripes, 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 stripes. And the closer related the word was to the thing that they were searching for, the quicker they found it. I know it sounds obvious, but obvious isn't always the right thing to believe. And we do need these studies to prove it, otherwise everyone's just making stuff up. We don't believe any longer that blood is blue, but for a long time people thought that it was, and it was exposure to oxygen that turned it red. So even obvious ideas still need testing. So some people in the looking for an image experiment were told to speak aloud, some not. And the speaking aloud people, they found it quicker. So if you're looking for your car keys, saying car keys, car keys, car keys, car keys will help you find them. But saying, I can't find my car keys, I can't find them. Where have you put them, woman? You know, that's probably going to end in your wife pointing at them and going, well, they're right in front of you, you idiot. I speak from experience. But the biggest take home, I think, from all of this is about learning. Study after study has shown us that talking aloud helps us to learn. And if you have children, then it's especially important that they talk themselves through things. Now, it's definitely worth mentioning how self-talk can be a problem. Because if you're struggling with something or you've made a mistake, to verbally flog yourselves and call yourself stupid or an idiot isn't going to steer you in that happy direction. And I am willing to bet that the severity of what you say doesn't even match the reason why you're flogging yourself in the first place. You are not an absolute idiot just for opening the fridge too quickly and an egg falls off the door shelf. And I'll also wager that if somebody else did the same, you wouldn't be anywhere near as rude to them, so don't have double standards. If you're willing to offer somebody else kindness and respect, then have that same kindness and respect for yourself too. Because if your brain learns more when you vocalise something, make sure that what you vocalise is constructive. Now, this can be hard if what you vocalise is part of an internal dialogue that isn't even your voice anyway. Sometimes our inner voice is somebody from our past, a critical parent, a cruel teacher, something like that. And if that's the case, you need to be aware of it, that it's not your voice, even if it might sound like it. It's an inner critic. And it's worth doing what's called disidentifying, which means to treat that inner voice as if it isn't anything to do with you at all anyway. It's somebody else. It's Mr. or Mrs. Critic, Mrs. Chastise, or Mr. Rude from the Mr. Men, maybe. And you can ignore them. It's just someone else being a pain. It's not you. It's a bit easier then to be able to defend yourself if you have to, and say something like, "Hey, fair's fair. I didn't know those eggs were suicidal when I went to the fridge," or whatever is appropriate. When you notice your self-critical talk, you can understand a little as to why it's there and find alternatives. A client once told me how after she just had a baby, she was constantly criticising herself out loud. "This house is a mess, I'm useless." And it was knocking her confidence, obviously. She brought it into therapy, and in exploring it, we realised it wasn't her voice in her head. It was her mum's. She was comparing herself to her mum, who was a bit of a neat freak. And there was no way that, having just had a baby, she was going to be able to match this perfectionist attitude of her mum. Think of talking to yourself as a tool to help you navigate through life, to motivate yourself with some optimistic encouragement, or just as a way of narrating your life. If you treat yourself with respect, you might just find that you're well on your way to actually enjoying your own company. That might make a change for a lot of you. There we go, folks. Hope all that makes sense, because genuinely the words that we use on a daily basis in our head, and especially out loud, they have a dramatic influence on how we see the world, and more important, maybe how we see ourselves. So watch what you say. By the way, because this was based on a live video episode, I've actually been video recording these intros and outros. And the whole thing is on, I just waved, and the whole thing is also on YouTube as well now. So, well, it will be soon. If you want to go and watch, no, it probably would be by now, because I bet I'll put that on first. Yeah, it'll be on there now. I've been putting things on YouTube for years. There's lots of weird and different things. You can subscribe to me on there. Please do. My most popular video, rather bizarrely, is of some blokes dancing at a music festival, and I dubbed it with Yakety Sax, the Benny Hill theme tune. I guess we all like to smile, don't we? That video and my emetophobia systematic desensitization images, they're the popular ones. Turns out we all want to laugh, but nobody wants to vomit. I guess you don't need a YouTube channel to figure that out. Righto, you beauties. Let's go for today. For the patrons amongst you, I'll be back on Monday talking about mental focus. And for everybody else, the final part of my live stream is going to be on probably Thursday next week. So enjoy your week. Soak up some positivity, some optimism and some inspiration. And I will see you soon, folks. Take care.